Welcome to the Classical Architecture Workshop. My name is Professor Brandon Rowe, and today's lesson we are going to continue with the Corinthian order. Specifically, we're going to look at how to draw the entablature. As before, we'll be using the American Vignola, a guide to the making of classical architecture by William Ware. As was discussed earlier, one thing that sets the Corinthian order apart in the Corinthian order is specifically that it has medallions supporting the cornice. These medallions are adorned with an acanthus leaf on the sides, and this is one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Corinthian entablature in and of itself. So we're going to be looking a little bit more closely at this. When you break the entablature up on the Corinthian order, according to William Ware, this height of the cornice, that top third, is divided into 5 parts. It is also the same as 1d, or in other words, the diameter of the column. The 2 lower and the 2 upper parts of this cornice resemble the lower and upper halves of the Ionic cornice. The middle fifth is occupied by a medallion band, and that's that distinguishing characteristic we just talked about. This carries, the medallion band carries the medallions or brackets. These, as well as the medallion band, are crowned by a small cyma reversa molding. They consist of a double scroll, beneath which is an acanthus leaf. As the medallions are 2/3 of the diameter on centers, or 4/6, right below those we have the dentils. Those are 1/6 on centers. As William Ware notes, it follows that there are 4 dentils to each medallion, a dentil under every medallion, and 3 between. So as in the Ionic order and in the denticulated Doric that we've looked at earlier, the last dentil, which is the first half of the double dentil, is centered over the face of the lower diameter of the column itself. That's important to note. Also, when we look at the lower third of the column, the architrave, this is 3/4 of a diameter high. It has 3 bands and a large cymatium, which is as wide as the first band. The 2 lower bands occupy the lower half of the architrave, and the third band and the cymatium the upper. A small bead or a small cyma reversa generally crowns each of these bands. The frieze, the center portion, which is also 3/4 of a diameter high, it can either be plain, it can be pulvinated, or it can be sculpted, as in what is depicted here. So with that, let's get started drawing Vignola's Corinthian entablature. As we begin to draw the Corinthian entablature, just as before, you're going to need a couple of tools: an architectural scale, either a builder's square to draw a couple of right angles, 90-degree. You're also probably going to need your triangle with a 45-degree on it. To speed things up this go around, I'm going to also use what's called a rolling ruler, and obviously a pencil and a pen. So let's get things started. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is just as we did with the previous Corinthian base for the column itself and the capital. We were drawing it at a scale of 3 inches equals 1 foot. So if we've got my architectural scale here, and I flip over to my 3 inches equals a foot, there's a couple of elements here where they're actually 1D, 1 diameter. So for instance, my cornice is exactly 1D, so you can see that that is 3 inches. So that would, if it was built in real life, that would be 1 foot in distance. So that is the scale that we're going to be drawing this at. A couple other things that we're going to be doing that are a little bit different than this. We're not necessarily going to block out the entire column capital on the bottom there. We'll probably block that out. These medallions here at the top, these are what we were explaining earlier, what make the Corinthian Entablature unique. They're these little supporting brackets with an acanthus leaf, sometimes wrapped on the side of them as well as wrapped underneath. Those we'll probably just block those out for simplicity's sake. The other thing that's unique as we draw this, and this element will probably omit as well, but within the corona, and that's this area here, there's usually what we call a sunken caisson, and in the center of which is a little rosette. Those we will not necessarily draw in this tutorial, but they're dashed in there so you can see what those would look like. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I've got my little cheat sheet here. But what you're going to see as we're setting this drawing up to scale is that the total entablature height. Anyone remember how tall that should be? That is, when we're doing the block order, if you recall, that total entablature height is 2.5D. So if we're using our 3-inch scale here, we're going to see that we've got 1, 2.5, 2.5 feet is how tall we're going to draw this. So if we're at 3-inch scale, that means that this total height is going to be 7.5 inches. The width that we're going to need, the farthest width, is going to be 7 inches. So let's get started with that. So if I grab my square here, so what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to make sure that I've got roughly enough area here. So I've got my 7 inches in this dimension. I'm going to leave a little bit of space here so I can add some text over there on the side. And then 7.5 going down. I'm going to try to put this close to the top of the page, just so that in case you do want to eventually draw or block in at least that column capital, that you'll be able to. Alright, so I think we're ready. So let's go ahead and draw this over. Mark it at 7 inches. Go down to 7.5 inches. Okay, so once we've got that, we're also going to add this bottom of the entablature, which is also going to serve as the top of the column itself. Going to strike a line there fairly lightly. Okay, now with that, we are going to put a couple of graphic scales adjacent to this. the first thing that we're going to do is, just as we did with the block order, we're going to block out the three main components for the entablature. So if we're looking at our guide here, we've got our architrave, which is 3/4 D, our frieze is 3/4 D, and then our cornice is 1 D, to give us a total of 2.5 D. I'm going to grab my rolly ruler. And this is nice if you don't have a full drafting setup. So that you can create parallel lines. So I'm going to create that first one, and then I'm going to go down just a little bit, about a 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to strike another graphic scale there. And then once I've got that one, I'll go another 1/4 of an inch. Strike one last graphic scale. So we should have 3 graphic scales right adjacent to each other. We will, in fact, create another one here at the top, but just for a smaller division. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and mark out our larger divisions. So we said that first one, starting from the top and going down for the cornice, is 1 D. So that's going to be 3 inches. So if we're using our 3-inch scale, that divides nicely. And while we're there, we're also going to subdivide this cornice, this 1D, into 4 different divisions. And so we're going to do that by, if this is essentially 12 inches here, we're going to go every 4 inches we're going to have, excuse me, not every 4 inches, every 3 inches we're going to have a little tick mark there. So there's our first, and we're just, since this is our main one for entablature, we're going to pull that out just a little bit. As we keep going down, we're going to do 3/4 D. So if this full thing is D, we're going to do 3/4 of that. So every 3 inches on here, we're going to do tick mark. And that is going to give us our frieze. We'll extend that out so we know where that division is. And then the bottom, we will do the same for the architrave. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and label those. So that is our architrave on the bottom, and that is 3/4 D. And then next we have our frieze. Which is also 3/4 D. And then finally at the top we have our cornice, which is 1 D. Okay, there. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and strike lines on these across to get these major divisions for our entablature. Make sure that is square. Okay. All right. Now that we've got that we're going to subdivide. Let's start at the bottom now. Let's subdivide this architrave itself into 4 divisions. And these 4 divisions are going to represent 3/16 D. This one in particular is somewhat of an odd dimension there. So to get something that is going to be rather clean, we're going to use our diagonal rule. So if we go ahead and use our 3-inch scale, here we are. And I'm going to put this diagonally so that the 0 and what represents the 12 are touching both of those top and bottom lines for the architrave. And then to divide it into 4, just as we did up here at the cornice, I'm going to put a little line there at the 3, the 6, and the 9. And I'm going to use those to go across. So let's make sure our So for this first division, we're going to take this over to the next graphic scale. So that line there looks like that. That's our first division. And we'll take it up to the next. This next one we can actually take all the way across. This is going to serve as one of our fascia bands. Make sure that's straight. And then the last one, this one we're going to take over to that second graphic scale. Instead of taking the line in a straight solid line all the way across, we're going to dash this. This is going to help us get set up later as we start to draw the architrave. Okay, so the nice thing about the frieze is that it is a big blank space, so we don't need to do any further divisions on that one. We could actually go ahead and erase these portions of the graphic scale if we wanted to, since we won't need those. Right. So next, now that we've got that division in place for the architrave, let's go ahead up to the cornice and start doing some of those. Before we do those, however, let us draw in our center line where our column would line up, because that's also going to give us a couple of other clues and hints on how far we should be drawing some of these division lines. So to do that, the distance here, going all the way to the very edge of the summation, is 1D plus another 5/12 D. But if we're drawing that to scale, what we're going to get is 4 1/4 of an inch over from where we marked that 7 earlier. That is going to be our center line. And then while we're at it, let's go ahead and go from that furthest 7 and go in 3 inches, and that is going to be our 1D, which is going to be the face of our entablature itself. Okay, so now that we've got those, let's go ahead here and strike a couple lines down. Let's make sure that it's lined up correctly. So for this first one, until we get to the freeze area, we're going to do a dash line. As it comes across the cornice. Then for the freeze area, we're just going to do a solid line. And then in the architrave area, we're going to continue with another dash line as it goes down. So it should look something like that. And this is the face of our entablature as it starts to go up. Now let's go ahead and create our center line. For that entire area. Just make sure this is straight. And our center line, as you recall, is more of a long dash, a little dash, a long dash, a little dash. You're going to do that all the way down. And even go past the bottom of the architrave, because that will be the center point of the column itself. Okay, now that we've got that done, what we're going to do is we're going to strike a 45-degree from where this face intersects our top of our frieze and the bottom of our cornice. We're going to take that over to the far edge of the top of the cornice there. And we're just going to dash in a diagonal, and that is going to guide us in drawing all of the moldings for the cornice itself. There we go. And if you recall, that's more or less what we did in the block order. That's what we drew when we're drawing that overall layout. Okay, now that we've got that established, we've got our center line, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull some of these lines up just a little ways. And while we are at it, we will add a dimension stringer there. Okay, so we're going to label this as 1D. That's going to be 3 inches. And then this one we're going to label as 5/12 D. And we'll also label this center line with our CL for center line. Alright, great. Okay, so what we need to do now for this entire cornice is we need to divide this into 5 equal parts. So I'm going to write here 5 divisions for this next graphic scale, and each of those is going to be 1/5 D. But as you can see here on the side, when we're dividing this into 5 divisions, a couple of these are actually divided in half. So instead of 1/5 D, some of these then become 1/10 D. This one becomes 1/10 D. This is 4 divisions, but if you split it in half, that's 1/10 D. And same with these other ones that broken down into 6 subparts. They still have a center in them. So if we kind of subdivide this and mark our lines with 10 divisions instead, it's going to set us up for success for that later graphic scale. So to do this one, I'm actually going to use my 3/8 of a scale to do my diagonal rule that we've talked about. And what I'm going to do here, if I'm following my 3/8, this is the 0, taking this over to the 10. And you got to be careful there because there's two 10s right next to each other. The smaller numbers pertain to the 3/8 scale. So if I go ahead and put this small 10, line that up, do the diagonal so that I can get the 0 on that top line of the cornice. And then I am going to use these divisions. I'm going to mark all 10. So I'll just put a very light line there so you can see those divisions of 10. Now I'm going to get my rolling ruler just so I can create a couple of parallel lines going all the way down there. So the first one I'm just going to do on this first graphic scale. The second one is going to be my first 5th division. I'm going to take that to both. Next one down, I'm only going to take it on that most inner graphic scale. And that's the pattern we're going to do as we go down through the remainder of these. Okay, so now that we have those divisions, so we've got our 5 divisions and then we've got some other divisions there, we're going to strike some of these lines all the way across to start building our entablature. To do this, however, we're going to start at the very top. The first line that's going to come all the way across is going to mark out our cymatium molding, and we're going to take that 5th and draw that all the way across until we hit that diagonal. The next one, we're going to go down another 5th, and this line here is going to be the bottom of our corona molding. We're going to take that one all the way to the diagonal. And we're going to go down to that next 5th, 1/5 D. And this one here is going to act as kind of the bottom of our medallion band over there on the side. This one we're actually going to go a little bit past the diagonal there. And then the next few, we're going to do a couple. These ones we're going to do the subdivisions. So instead of the 1/5 D, we go down that next 1/10 D. And that line we're going to take all the way across. which serves as part of our bed mold. If we go down another 1/10 D, that one we're not going to actually place a line across, but we're going to go down another 1/10 D and strike this line across, and this one just going to go just barely over the diagonal again. So there we have it. We're starting to get things in place. Let's finish some of these other divisions here within the top band for the cornice itself. So let's label these before we get started on those divisions, though, however. So this first one is 2 subdivisions, which equals 1/10 D. Same with this next one, 2 1/10 D. Okay, so with this one, though, we need to do a few other subdivisions. You could do the diagonal rule on this to be more accurate, but I am just going to subdivide these 2 halves into 6. So each of these halves would have 3. So if I just eyeball it to be able to get 3 divisions there on one side and 3 divisions on the other side, that's going to give me my 6 parts, and that is 1/30 D. This next one, instead of looks like that's a little off there. Should actually be a little bit lower. This next one should actually be 4 parts to be able to create 1/20 D. And so this one, each of those halves, I'm just going to cut those in half. Eyeball that. And then the top one, just as we did before, is going to go into 6 divisions, which is 1/30 D. So we're going to divide each side into 3 divisions. There. Okay. So just going back to our template here, with creating these additional subdivisions, now that's going to give us enough information to create some of these additional lines across. So the first one, we're going to go down 1/6. Then we're going to skip 4, and then that 1/6 before you hit that other division, we'll strike a line there. And then we'll keep rolling down. Okay, as we get there, make sure that is straight. We'll go down 1/6 part, or our 1/30 D, and we're going to strike a line all the way across until it gets just a little bit past the diagonal there. We're going to go down another 4, or 1 up from the bottom. We're going to strike a line across there. Take that over. With this next one, the 4 divisions, the only one that we're going to bring across is actually that top 4th, and that equals our 1/20 D. Take that across. Now we're going to come down to our 6 additional divisions. On this one, we're only going to strike a line across that top 1/30 D. Okay. I think that gives us everything we wanted. Now this is the one where we're going to go in and create another smaller little graphic scale here for just this very bottom portion of the cornice. And this one we're going to eyeball, but it is going to be subdivided into 4 parts. And the line across is only going to be that bottom 4th that we're going to take that over to the diagonal. Besides the dentils themselves, that gives us all of the major lines that we're going to need going across. So now let's transition down to the architrave itself, and we are going to subdivide these into a couple of other divisions. The first of which is this one from the bottom. We're going to do that in 6. Going up 1, that's going to be 3, and then that upper band of the architrave, or what we call the Architrave Cornice, that is going to be 6. So these ones I'm going to first, the 6s, split those in half, and then from there subdivide those into thirds. I'll just doing this by our eyes. And then the one in the 3 divisions, I'm just going to do this eyeballing it as well. Okay, so let's start with the top there. So for the Architrave Cornice, we're going to go down 1/6 part, strike a line across. Then we're going to go down another 3 divisions, strike a line across there, go down an additional 1, strike a line. So it should look something kind of like that. Now let's go to our 3rd division line, where we subdivide it into 3 parts. We're only going to strike a line across that top 3rd. And then as we go down to the bottom 6 divisions, we're going to go down 1/6. We're going to strike a line, and then we're going to go down another 1/6 part and strike a line. It should look like that. Okay. To be able to get a couple of other critical components here, as you remember, when we were drawing the columns, the column base was 6 parts, or dividing D into 6, so 1/6 D is what we're creating. Once we get to the top, though, it subdivides into 5/6 D. We're going to use this subdivision to actually get our 1/9 D. So what we're going to create here is this, because that gives us our lineup for the column, but it also gives us that face of the entablature in general as it goes up, and we've already got that line marked on our drawing, so we're good there. Now we just need to kind of draw the other side, because what we're going to do is we're going to take 2/6D and we're going to subdivide that into 3 parts, which is going to give us one of which would be 1/9 D, which is a really odd dimension when you start doing the math. It's 11/32 of an inch. But just And also just to remember, 1/6D equals ½ an inch, or this full distance will be 2.5 inches. So that is what we're going to create now. So going up from the bottom of the architrave, just a hair, we're going to create a little graphic scale on the bottom here. And then right above it, going from the center line over, we're going to create another little graphic scale. So if I go ahead and get my ½ inch scale here, I'm going to go till I get to 5 because it's 5/6D, so I'm going to mark a line there. Oops. Sure that's lined up. That's 4. That's 5. Okay. So now that I've got that, I'm going to write that is 5/6D. And then this top little graphic scale that we created, we are going to create those 3 divisions. So if I'm eyeballing that, oh, excuse me, we're going to do that just for 2. If we take that up, that is roughly our 1/9 D. Oops, not inches. I can erase this part. Why we need that 1/9 D is actually up here at the top. Each of our dentals is the overall thickness of it is 1/9 D. From center line to center line, however, that's 1/6D, which is ½ an inch, just as we were drawing down here. So that gives us that placement. But another way to get the placement is essentially to draw your 1/9 D here, and then do a diagonal, and that will give you some of these other guiding lines. So that's the next step we're going to take here. So as we're doing this, the other thing to note is that these dentals are also 1/6 D in terms of their overall height. And so to be able to do this, when we start laying this out, we actually are going to center it in between these 2 divisions, these 2 210D here. We could subdivide it even more and to be able to get this completely accurate, but for our purposes with this drawing, we'll just go ahead and center it there. So to center it, we're just going to get our ½ inch scale, and try to center that between those 2 lines. That's going to get us started. And then what I'm going to do with our guide here is I'm going to actually just create a little hand scale to get our 1/9 D. And I'm going to take that up here to the top. I'm going to center that on our center line. so I can get this started. So that is our 1/9 D. And what we'll do is we are going to strike another couple of lines here, and I'll leave this over here on the guide. So we're going to go down to where we centered that 1/6 D. We're going to strike a line all the way across until it gets to the diagonal. And then that bottom one, we're just going to do a very light line to guide us, take it to the diagonal a little bit past there. Let's now that we've got those two lines marking where our first dental is, and that dental is always centered above the column. There we've got that dental marked out. So if we were to take our trusty triangle and put it here, what we're going to find out is that if we dash in a diagonal line from the far right corner, or I'm just going to draw a very light line there, that is going to give us the edge for our next dental. But I'm also going to do that, take the 45 and take it to the corner of my dental on the left hand side, and if I take that across, what that's going to give me is then the edge of the other dental. So if we wanted to check it real quick, our little scale that we created, you can see that where those two intersections are, that roughly equals our 1/9 D. Okay, so we're going to mark that other dental, create the vertical lines for that. So now we've got two dentals there. And now that I've got two dentals, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a little dental scale for myself, which has the little spacer in between, and I'm going to use that to mark off the additional dentals. I could follow the diagonal method, but it just takes a little bit longer. Do it on the other side as well. And then the thing to note is once you get past this diagonal line here, instead of creating one additional space, you're just going to create one additional dental that goes past that. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. But let's go ahead and get our rolling ruler. Just mark off, create these dentals that we just marked off, measured out. So here where we would have had another space, we're just actually, once we get past the diagonal, we'll just have an additional dental that comes out there. Okay, so in between all of those dentals, you're going to notice that there's a little spacer in between there. There's a little horizontal line. So we're going to go ahead and put in that horizontal line. And the location of that is given to us where that diagonal line intersects the side of that first dental. And like I said, this is only going to be going in where we have those spacers. But that one on the end, we will actually create an additional little square there. That's how it, this square actually, as the entablature wraps around the corner, that becomes a nice feature. Okay, so in between those spaces for the dentals, we can actually erase that bottom line. Oops. Let's go ahead and darken up those dentals. The bottom of them, so they stand out a little bit more. Oops, excuse me. My hair was getting in the way there. Apologize. Okay. So now we've got one of the more tricky parts of the entablature drawn out. So let's take a break from the cornice itself. Let's dive back to the architrave. And the first thing that we're going to do here is, as we're creating the architrave, what we have is it's broken down into a lower fascia, a mid fascia, and then an upper fascia. And then on top of it, you kind of have a mini cornice for the architrave itself. This is what we're going to go ahead and draw now. So to begin with, that lower fascia, where we've dashed in this line, we're just going to make that a solid line as it goes up to that first little intersection. And then that little 1/6 division, we're going to create a bead mold, which is essentially half a circle. And then going out from there and up, we're going to create a straight line. That's where the fascia starts to protrude out. And then the next area, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our 45-degree triangle again, line this up on our baseline, and then where these two dashed lines intersect, we're going to create another 45-degree line that goes across there. And what that's going to do is give us the outermost edge of the architrave cornice. So once we've got that intersection of where that triangle meets that top of the architrave, we're going to strike a line straight down. And then we're going to create what's called a cyma reversa molding. Usually this is more of kind of a cupping type shape where it's supporting something that's above it and then curves back underneath. But to create those, what we're going to do is we're going to create another little diagonal line, or even just a light line there. And that is, if we mark the center of that diagonal line, the 45, that is going to be the center point where our two circles make this transition. So to begin with, let's create that first half or quarter radius, then come down to the bottom. We're going to jog that in just a little bit, and then right underneath that Cyma reversa molding, we're going to have another bead mold. Just half a diameter. That is then going to go straight down. And under that one, we are going to have another, Cyma reversa molding. And that gives us the edge condition for our entire architrave. Go ahead and thicken some of those lines up. Okay, you can erase any of those lines that kind of went a little bit too far out beyond the face there. There we go. So once we get up to the cornice, right, the frieze is completely blank. Once we get up to the cornice itself, what you're going to find is that we've got another a bead that we're going to create in that little 1/4 division. And then going down from the dental there, we're going to go straight down, and we're going to go in half the distance between where that diagonal is. And what we're going to create is another Cyma reversa molding. And by the end of this, you'll be good at drawing these. We'll create that, and that's going to jog back in. Okay. Once we get past our last dental, because if we do a spot check, that last dental from the center line should actually be 4/6D. So if we had our 1/2 inch scale there, and we'll go ahead and create this little mark. So there we've got 4. That should line up really nicely with our last dental that we created. Looks like mine's a little bit off. If I go up from there, drawing a dashed line, that should give us more or less what we're looking for. We'll call that 4/6D to that area. And right above the dentals, you have a little fillet mold that comes out at a 45°. And then going from there up, you've got a bed mold molding, or a quarter round. Okay, so that gives us at least a good portion of that bottom 1/4 more or less, or 1/3 of the cornice profiles. Next, what we need to create, though, right in this next area, what we call the Medallion Band, is these little brackets that help support the upper cornice, the cymatium and the corona. So to be able to create those brackets are also centered on that center dentil that's centered on the column down below. And so we need to create that. But to create that, each side of the bracket is 1/9 D. So you remember how we created our little movable scale that we can take with us. Because in between, I'll bring this over just for illustrative purposes, in between each bracket there's going to be 3 dentals down below. Or another way of thinking about it is going from one bracket to the next bracket, you're going to have 4 dentals in between that area. So if I come over here and grab my little cheat sheet that we created, I've got that marked out. And then what we need to do is where we just marked out here on the side, that 4/6D, that becomes the center line for this next bracket. And it would be the same on the opposite side, so every 2 inches if you wanted to view it that way. So we could go over here and measure 2 inches. That is going to be that center of that next medallion bracket. So let's take our 1/9 little scale that we've got here. And let's do the same on this side. I'm going to grab my rolling ruler. Mark out the sides of those brackets. Oops, excuse me. I marked it on the wrong spot here. Shouldn't go there. It should go to the 4/6D instead. Alright, just above each of these brackets, now that we've created those, you're going to have a little cyma reversa molding that supports it and connects it to above on either side. Go ahead and mark those out. Okay. The next thing that we need to do, now that we've kind of have this marked out, because this distance here, as we go to that outer medallion, is 1/4 D, and we keep going until we hit that edge, which is 1/9 D. But going beyond that, what we're going to find is that this little overhang for the medallion, the side profile view of it, that's more or less 5/12 D. So to get that, if you did the math, it comes out to about 1 1/4 inch. So I am going to mark that out here. And for just to simplify things for the duration of this video, we're not going to draw all of the scroll details on each of these. But this little box, rectangular box area, that is what would be our medallion. And just as we did here, we're going to have that little cyma reversa supporting that area. And like I said before, that is our 5/12 D. Okay, from there, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top and then work our way back down to be able to get the rest of this. So just as we did before when we were drawing that larger cyma reversa molding, at the top here, this cymatium, that is what we call a cyma recta molding profile. It's created somewhat similar. So we're going to create a little diagonal line going from the top of that little fillet there. Mark the center of that. And instead of coming down here, it's going to flare out. It's going to be the inverse. So the bottom is actually going to be the one that's going to flare out like this, or inward, and then the top is going to flare out. So we've got that. Right where that bottom intersects that line, we're going to go vertical down to that next intersection there. We're going to go in just a little ways. We are going to create another cyma reversa as we have in the past. And then from there, we just go vertical down and we should be just a little bit shy of that other cyma reversa that we created there on the bottom. And there you have it, folks. That is the gist of our Corinthian entablature. We're going to go ahead and outline some of these in pen so that you can see those profiles a little bit better. Just about there. We'll go ahead and do the top as well. And we'll do the bottom. There we go. We have just drawn the Corinthian Entablature. Thanks for joining, and see you next time.